Hey, Danny here, founder of Songwriters International. If you're a songwriter, producer, artist wanting to develop their craft as a songwriter, then you are in the right place. Now in this video today, we're going to be talking about the great songwriter that is Bob Dylan. He's an incredible lyricist, writes great melodies, writes great stories, and follows some key principles to writing great songs that we're going to be breaking down here, which are the top 5. Now if you're also watching this video, I'm going to be giving away one free coaching session where I will coach you with your songwriting for over 60 minutes. We'll go through your songs, your lyrics, your melodies, everything that is your songwriting. If you want to have a chance to win that, then just drop in the comment below mentoring, and then I'll be choosing one person at random to come and have a 60-minute coaching session on all things songwriting. So the first place we're going to start is inspiration. The inspiration to feed a song. Now Bob Dylan says something around this that I completely agree with, and something that I teach to all of our songwriters. You can go anywhere in daily life and have your ears open and get an idea. Basically what Bob Dylan is saying here, that his inspiration is literally everywhere. It's in the conversations that you have. It's on the social media apps that you scroll through. It's on the internet that you go and look. It's in the newspaper articles that you read online or physically. Songwriting ideas are literally everywhere, and there's no reason why you can't find inspiration in even the strangest places. Many a great song that I listen to, that I've written, have come initially from a spark, from a conversation that I've had with somebody, from a quote that I've read online, from a social media post that I was scrolling through. And the key thing is you've got to put yourself in inspiration's way. You've got to be willing to want to go and find the ideas and not wait for inspiration to come to you. Now, into number 2, don't overcomplicate the process. This is the backbone of the way that Bob Dylan would always write a song. Not overcomplicating, not overanalyzing things. Let's take a look at some of his lyrics and how he basically just said some of the simplest things that were on his mind and how it delivered in the song. Let's take a look at this song, A Simple Twist of Fate. Let's look at the opening lyrics. As you can see here, it just starts with, they sat together in the park as the evening sky grew dark. Quite literally just saying what he wants to say in the simplest way. Another example here is Ballad of a Thin Man. You walk into the room with your pencil in your hand. He's quite literally just painting the scene, but he's saying it in the simplest way for the listener to fully understand. The biggest tip I can give you from Bob Dylan songs, and also a backbone that I always use, is say what you want to say for your song. If you want to say, I miss you, I love you, or that I want to go and travel the world, or whatever it is for the context of your song, don't worry about overcomplicating it in the same way Bob Dylan doesn't. And oftentimes, the simplest lyric makes the most sense for the listener and does the song the most justice, because it's just a conversation. What I want you to understand, that the song is a conversation between you and the listener, and telling the story. Now here, you've got point A, which is the start of the song. The listener doesn't understand anything about the story or anything that you want to deliver in that lyric. And then you've got B point, where the listener understands everything that's been delivered in your song. They know who the characters are, what the context of the story is, who's in it, and everything else. But in between is the story. And oftentimes, it's just a conversation, telling the listener from point A to point B what happens in a simple way so that they fully grasp the story of your song. Into point 3. Now we're going to go into the story / the lyrics here. Now we did just touch upon this briefly, but Bob Dylan used to write a lot of folk form, and we're going to be talking about what that is in a second. But a lot of his songs were folky, and what you find with folk form is they don't have a traditional chorus, and the emphasis is on the story. So this is a great way to improve your lyrical and your story way of writing songs. Why? Because all of the emphasis is on these two things rather than hooks. And what Bob Dylan did really well was what I was just talking about. The point A to point B and the story that went in between. But the most important thing above everything else that you want, if we just move this out of here, we don't just want any story. What we do want is a progressive story. A progressive story is a story that evolves. If in verse 1 you're writing about travelling the world, for example, verse 1 might be about packing your bags. And then going on to verse 2 is about boarding the plane. Verse 3 is about the destination where you're at. Possibly verse 4 is that it's not what you expected. It's actually you're missing home. You want to go back. You can see how that, in that example, is just a very easy progressive story. Now, of course, you can become a little bit more complex, but the backbone of Bob Dylan's songs, in all of his songs, is that he had progressive stories. They always mention something new. And another tip I also want to share with you is that each verse in your song, because the verse is where you're going to tell a story. So if you want a story in your song, you're going to be telling it 9 times out of 10 in the verse. That's why Bob Dylan used to always use folk form, because it was verse dominated. So if a big focus of your song is the story, then you really want to emphasize the verses. Now, what you've also got to do is make sure that each verse, let's say you have 3 verses in your song, each one of them has to deliver something new for the listener. So, for example, if we use that one we mentioned of boarding the plane and going away to a new country because you want to travel the world. If in verse 1 we're talking about packing the bags and leaving, but then in verse 2 we're still in a very similar place, we're still getting our stuff ready, it's not progressive, we're not telling the listener something new. And a lot of songs that I get sent for feedback, a lot of the time they don't have the progressiveness in the lyric. They don't tell something new. Now, when I say progressive, it could be a song that reflects. It could still go backwards, but it's progressive because it tells the listener something new. Let me give you an example of that. Let's suppose you've got a love song, and in verse 1, you're breaking up with somebody. It's finishing. It's over. And verse 2 is reflective of all of the amazing times that you had together. That itself is going back in time, but it's still progressive for the listener because it's telling them something new. Let's go into point 4. Let's talk about hooks, and also something I just talked about is folk form. Now, as I mentioned, Bob Dylan wasn't really a big hook writer in the traditional sense. In traditional songs that you hear, you've got a chorus. But in a lot of Bob Dylan songs, he didn't have your traditional chorus, which is where it gets them singing along. What he did instead is folk form, because Bob Dylan typically was on his guitar, he was very folk, he was very story driven, he was very lyric driven. So if you're a songwriter that does like lyrics and you like the story to be the main focus of your song, then folk form is very important for you to do that. But I just want to share with you the difference between a folk form song and how it works structurally versus a traditional pop format that is going to be heard on your radios commercially. So if we go to folk form first, so what we would have is something like a verse that then goes into another verse. Then again, we go into a third verse. But in a traditional pop commercial song, you wouldn't have this because the emphasis is not a lot of the time on the verses. And then what we would do here is we would do what we call a refrain. Okay, what that does for the listener is they've had verse, verse, verse. They need an escape for a second. They just need to go somewhere new. So then we go back into a refrain, and then you'll find we'll do something like this. This is what a folk form may traditionally look like. It might have a little bit more of a verse, or it might have an extra refrain, but as a law of average, we would have somewhere between 6 to 7 verses with maybe about 2 refrains in there. So you can see the focus is on the verse. We want to tell a story. We want the lyric to be the poignant part of our song, which is what Bob Dylan did a lot in his songs. Now let's go to a more commercial, traditional, hook-driven song. You'd have something like a verse, and then you would use something like a pre-chorus. Then you go into your chorus, which is focusing on hooks. But what I want to share with you is how Bob Dylan uses folk form and still creates hooks without having a traditional chorus as we know it. So if we read the lyrics of Blowing in the Wind, so we start with, how many roads must a man walk down before you can call him a man? How many seas must a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? And how many times? Now, if you see the pattern here, what he is doing is he's creating the hook, but in the opening line by asking a question. And the constant reoccurring theme is the how many times, how many times, how many times. And that continues on into the next verse, and it is a reoccurring theme, but it's not your traditional chorus as you would know it. The next song here is the song by Bob Dylan, which he wrote, but Adele went on and made it a smash hit. Now if we read through the lyrics, and she starts with, When the rain is blowing in your face and the whole world is on your case, I could offer you a warm embrace to make you feel my love. Then into the next verse. When the evening shadows and the stars appear and there's no one there to dry your tears, I could hold you for 1,000,000 years and guess what's coming again to make you feel my love. So here, what Bob actually does is he has the make you feel my love as a reoccurring theme at the end of every verse. Now he does have what we call a refrain. So the refrain is that section where it says, I know you haven't made your mind up yet. That's what we call a refrain. A section of the song that offers an escape for the listener for a second and then draws them back in to a verse that goes back to make you feel my love, which is the reoccurring hook, but it's not in a traditional chorus format. It's using folk form, but the last line keeps repeated. And point number 5, finally, is production. This oftentimes is so overcomplicated, it's crazy, especially in the time that we're in right now. Everybody wants to produce, everybody wants to add loads of layers to a song. In 9 times out of 10 cases, he's using his voice and he's using a guitar. He strips it so bare. The song production is so naked, right? Quite literally, got nothing on it. And that's because he wants to shine the light on the lyric. He wants to shine the light on the story and on the hook that he uses in his folk form. Because this statement here is so true. A great song stands alone. It doesn't need the production. A great song, when you sing it acoustic, is just as good or even better than the produced version that you hear on the radios. And unfortunately, that is not always the case with a lot of songs. A lot of songwriters hide behind a production. They'll say, oh, this song is okay, but it's going to be amazing when the producers actually get on the song. And all you're doing is hiding the cracks of a not so great lyric, a not so great melody, a not so great structure of your song that really emphasizes the main points that you want to get across. So the big focus here, where you can, draw back on the production and let the light shine on the story, the lyrics, and what you've created melodically. So they are the 5 keys and backbones to Bob Dylan and how he does things from inspiration right through to the production stages. So go away, take these in and consider these when you're actually writing your songs. If you haven't already, please consider dropping a subscribe for us here at Songwriters International for more videos just like this. As I mentioned before, if you want a one-to-one free coaching session, you want to be in to win that, then in the comment below just drop the word mentoring and I'll be picking someone at random and connecting with you guys and jumping out. And I will see you over on another video where we talk all things songwriting.